Whew, yes. Don't you hate when those unexpected repairs come up at your property? Well, you really should get in front of it. Delaying and ignoring maintenance and repairs issues can lead to larger, costlier problems down the road. And the worst of all, an unhappy tenant, which we don't want because we don't want a high turnover rate. We want that tenant to stay in the property for as long as we can and slowly increment the rent based upon how they've been keeping up on the property and what makes sense around the market conditions. So you want to be able to properly address the issues by conducting regular property inspections. There is some things that you can get ahead of. Just having people come out, check under the pipes, check the toilets, check all of the plumbing areas to make sure there's not something that's small right now that could be a big deal later on. This is a little trick, guys. It's a little bonus tip because your particular tenants may not be caring for your property the way you need. Well, welcome back to another episode of Lessons into Blessings podcast. I am your host, Tari Thomas, and today we are talking about 6 common mistakes that self-managed landlords make when managing the tenants, toilets, and termites. Look, if you haven't hired a property management company and you are self-managing your own properties, you might deal with some really big headaches. And today we're going to talk about how to avoid those headaches and do the right things up front to make sure that you don't end up in a similar situation that many landlords face. So if you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe, and we will get into our item number 1. So our first item is, and mistake that self-managed landlords make, is inadequate tenant screening. Man, this is a huge one. And skipping or rushing through tenant screening can lead to all sorts of headaches and renting nightmares because you're really putting your most trusted resource, your house, into an unreliable tenant's hands. And landlords should always conduct thorough background checks and due diligence to make sure they're putting the right tenants in the property. A lot of tenants rush and try to fill a property because they don't want they don't want their vacancy to be high, but there's trade-offs to everything. And there's many ways that you can ensure that you can try to fill your property within 30 days or less. And we can talk about that a little bit more later on. But here's how to avoid tenant fraud and just issues with doing screening. Number 1 is when you're doing the job where you're checking for job history issues, make sure that your pay stubs are not fake and that they have all the tenant employer information on the stubs in addition to the tenant's name. This is a really common one that's coming up lately because a lot of people are not receiving your traditional pay stubs. So you want to make sure that even if you have to get an employment letter and things like that, you want to make sure that you have all of the tenant's information because it's pretty easy to generate fake information these days in terms of a pay stub. Another way around this is also to ask for a bank statement. They can X out and mark off those areas that they don't want to show you and just show that there's been deposits made from their employer into their bank account, and you can ask for a couple months bank stub history. Now, if you are doing a rental verification, you really want to understand this particular interested tenant's previous rental history. Now, what we typically do is ask for the last landlord or the current landlord that particular tenant, what property that tenant was in. Here's where you might want to go a little bit deeper. You want to get at least rental history for the last 2 landlords. And why that's important is because you don't know what the current landlord situation is. That particular landlord may just want to get rid of that tenant, especially if they're living in the property and that tenant possibly is not making payments there or possibly has destroyed it. Another thing is that current landlord may not be doing inspections through the property. So they don't know really how that particular tenant is keeping up on the property. So if you get the landlord history of the landlord prior to their last rental, that's going to tell you a lot, because that particular person has already had to spend the money to be able to turn that particular property. And so they know how that particular tenant may have cared for the property, if they had animal or pet damage, all of that. That's going to give you a really thorough history. If you can't get that and you understand that there are gaps in their rental history, you may want to look at their credit history or check to see if they're making payments on time. So there may be some other ways around that. You definitely do not want to, if they're living with their mama or they're living with their friend, you don't want to use that as a credible source. Trust me, their moms want to get them out of the house too. So let's not make that mistake. And then just lastly, you want to ensure that you really check their eviction history. If it's too recent, really less than 5 years old, you put yourself in a little risk. I've made this mistake myself and I've learned from it. If they haven't paid the last person back, it's a high likelihood their credit is already damaged. It's a high likelihood they could do it again. So definitely make sure you check the eviction history and just set your own standard. Make sure you keep it, you keep with the Tenant Landlord Act provisions, but you want to make sure you set that, and you set that so that you're not set up for a situation where you may not get payments at all and you're in an eviction space. Also, just your typical things, checking criminal background history. Once again, you can be lenient on this criteria, but just make sure you're doing your due diligence and you're weighing the risk and reward. Now, there's times I've been lenient on some of these items, but there may be some additional things, letters of recommendation and things like that, that you may be able to get to make the trade-off on the risk. But you just want to make sure you're setting those standards ahead of time so that you're keeping it fair all across the board. So one of the biggest mistakes that self-managed landlords make is poor record keeping. Look, if you're a self-managed landlord, I get it. You're probably trying to save expenses. Been there, done that, doing it now. But you want to make sure that you're keeping accurate records to really offset any financial or legal issues. You want to keep an organized record of your rental income, your expenses, any correspondence with your tenants. That's going to be critically important because tenants can say what they want to say. So if you have to go into a court of law, you have to evict, you want to make sure all of this documentation, how your payments and your rental income is being logged, you want to make sure you have that. Because when you go into an eviction court, you're going to have to come up with a lease ledger. And this is really just documenting when your particular tenants have been paying, when they've paid, when they've been late. It's pretty much a history of all their payments. And so you want to really have those detailed records. In addition, for your own tax purposes, you want to make sure that you're keeping your necessary receipts so that you can properly document it on your taxes. Now, here's how you can potentially avoid that mistake. Number one, set up a separate bank account. Please do not commingle your funds, guys. Make sure you're setting up the right LLCs and doing all your due diligence there, and then setting up a corresponding bank account for all of those funds. Number one, it makes it very easy to track. And that way, whether you have a bookkeeper, you will be able to document your expenses. Even better, if you have a particular credit card that you want to use strictly for that particular property or strictly for that particular bank, then that is good as well. Now, another thing you can do is use a property management software. This is something that I do, and it has a lot of those financial pieces baked into it so that you can track, so that you can come up with a lease ledger and a lot of these documents that you'll need. So there's a lot out there. There's probably 1,000,001. Ones that I like, Buildium, Appfolio, that's more for your larger portfolios. But if you have 1, 2, 3 properties, Yardi is also another property management software that is good to use. Just make sure, guys, that you're doing your due diligence here and making sure that you're keeping accurate records for tax purposes and to avoid legal headaches. Okay, rounding up the number 3 position is neglecting maintenance and repairs. Ooh, yes. Don't you hate when those unexpected repairs come up at your property? Well, you really should get in front of it. Delaying and ignoring maintenance and repairs issues can lead to larger, costlier problems down the road. And the worst of all, an unhappy tenant, which we don't want because we don't want a high turnover rate. We want that tenant to stay in the property for as long as we can and slowly increment the rent based upon how they've been keeping up on the property and what makes sense around the market conditions. So you want to be able to properly address the issues by conducting regular property inspections. There is some things that you can get ahead of. Just having people come out, check under the pipes, check the toilets, check all of the plumbing areas to make sure there's not something that's small right now that could be a big deal later on. If you did your due diligence when purchasing this property, you should always check the major ticket items, which is your AC unit, your roof, your water heaters, your electrical, all of those big ticket items. And you should have an understanding on the age of your roof, the age of your AC system, because those are really costly items. So you don't want those to sneak up on you. And if you can do yearly maintenance or maintenance every 6 months to be able to avoid some of those issues, then that's going to be to your benefit. So some of the ways to avoid having any major maintenance and repair issues is set aside a budget for your repairs. Look, a lot of landlords do not put aside capital expenditures. This is an amount and a pocket that you set aside just to prepare for those big ticket item things that are going to come up, especially if you did your due diligence and you know exactly what things could go wrong with that property. It's safe to be able to set aside that amount so that you can pull from that. Especially, you don't want to just depend on your rental income. If you're making a lot of rental income, great. But a lot of times one expense can blow your rental income and then you're in the hole. And so you want to really be able to set aside that budget for those unexpected repairs. Now, you can also, this is a little trick, guys. It's a little bonus tip, because your particular tenant may not be caring for your property the way you need. You tell them how many times they should change the air filter. You tell them how many times they should change a lot of these things or check or do these things. Maybe you have a water softener and they're supposed to add certain things to it. You can just have someone come out and actually just bake it in the rent. Have someone come out and replace the air filters for them. That ensures that the right maintenance is actually happening. Look, we all forget to put our air filters, change out our air filters. It's a problem. Nobody handles it to the recommendation. So to avoid some of that, you can just have someone come in to do those every quarter or possibly twice a year that will check underneath the sink and check all of these items. Here's another thing that it helps you to do. It helps you to see how those tenants are maintaining the property. Are they keeping up their property or are they really damaging it? You have another set of eyes without you actually going into the property. You have a handyman or somebody that can actually put their eyes on it and tell you how they're keeping up. And that'll determine whether you want to renew that lease or not renew that lease. And this one takes us to number 4, misunderstanding landlord-tenant laws. Yes, another mistake that self-managed landlords make, because you're not necessarily keeping up on all of the landlord-tenant acts or laws for your particular state. But it is very good for you to refresh yourself once a year. There may be some classes that are given through real estate companies or your real estate board within your state to be able to keep you up on some of the latest changes to your Landlord-Tenant Act. Why is this important, guys? Because landlords make mistakes all of the times in this area, and it is very costly. Let me tell you, it's the bad tenants that know the law better than the good tenants. When you have a bad tenant, they usually know that law inside and out. and they will use it against you. Okay. So you want to make sure that you understand it, you educate yourself, you understand how much security deposits you're able to take, you understand what things you can put or not put into the lease agreement, you understand what the eviction procedures are, and all of the steps that you need to follow before you can evict a tenant. I've seen landlords try to just put a tenant out, and you cannot do that. You will be in a bad situation. So make sure you do, and you follow up on those things. And even better, if you have an opportunity to consult with a real estate attorney or a property management expert, that's something that you would want to do. Another thing you can do to avoid these problems is to just join a local landlord association to keep updated on any legal changes and to be able to get advice from. I do not want you to make a mistake in this area because it will be painful for you. And I don't want to see you make that that a lesson that you could avoid from other people's mistakes. Okay, this is leading us to number 5 to keep you self-managed landlords alive is you got to work on the improper lease agreements, guys. Whether you're going to work with a real estate attorney, get your lease agreements in place. Once you've got one, you can rinse and repeat, but you want to make sure you do not have just generic lease agreement language. You want to get specific because general language can lead to misunderstandings and disputes. So you want to be able to customize your lease agreements to clearly outline any terms, any conditions, responsibilities, things that are prohibited, not prohibited on your property. Okay, so some of the things that we can do to overcome this is just clearly outline all the terms and conditions of responsible parties. You are going to find things like rent, late fees, maintenance, things that you want them to maintain, and you can hold them to it. Okay. Termination, if they should terminate, what that looks like. Review the lease agreement with your tenants, because reviewing it with them helps you to kind of account that they've actually walked through all of the things that are very important to you and they understand what their obligations are. Now, I am a fan of addendums because general lease agreements don't necessarily include these things. So addendums could be for pets, they can be for pools, they could be for maintenance. Your move in, move out sheet, which I highly recommend that you guys do. A lot of people will just say, hey, everything good, everything good. They move the tenant in, and upon move out, you have no record of what that tenant or the condition that property was in before the tenant moved out. So I do highly recommend having that move in, move out as an addendum to your lease as well. But these addendums help save you a lot of headache, because there's all sorts of, if anybody should come in to your property and get hurt from a pool standpoint, even if it was not your fault, you are possibly liable as an owner of that property. So that's another thing to understand the laws, as we already previously talked about. Let me tell you, I've had an incident where we did not have an addendum for trampoline. We didn't even realize that the tenant had this. But this is something that when you learn the lesson, you roll it in and you turn it into a blessing. So now we have those addendums, because if you have a bouncy house or a tenant that has a trampoline and they leave their gate open and someone comes in onto the property and hurts themselves, it's possibly going to be, you might be possibly liable for that. So these are some of the headaches that you definitely want to avoid as much as possible. And always, you want to make sure that, you're as clear with your communication as possible, so there's no misunderstandings, and it'll just help to make sure that you have no issues moving forward. We are now coming up on our final mistake that landlords make. It's common. It's very common. Like, subscribe before I tell it to you. All right. Our number 6 mistake that self-managed landlords make: ineffective communication. This should be a given, right? If in relationships, communication is important, so is it between the landlord and the tenant. Look, poor communication with tenants is never a good thing. Now, they can sometimes dodge you if you have a bad tenant. They're not trying to, maybe they're not making their payments or things like that. But we avoided that with number one because we put the right tenant in place. But you want to make sure you're establishing clear, professional, and responsive communication channels. You should ask up front, what is the best ways to, whether it's by text, by phone, by email, make sure that you understand the best way to communicate. And if people are not responding to you, communicate via all channels. If it's something legal that you need to send, make sure you send it certified mail so that you have proof that you sent that communication for any legal reasons. Now, we hope that you are never in that position, but this is to make sure that you always are documenting and tracking your communication. Now, if you listen to our previous example and you have a property management software, you can communicate through the software. And so that communication can be tracked via that method as well. Another thing that's important is just to be approachable and responsive. So not only do you want to make sure that your tenant is being really responsive to you, they're telling you, and they're very open about telling you about any concerns that may be with the property, because you definitely want to address things as expeditiously as possible, because once again, you want to be able to keep the tenant in your home. But you want to make sure that you are approachable, you're responsive, so that your tenants aren't trying to avoid you. You're not making a big fuss every single time they call you to report an issue with the property. The more responsive, the more approachable you are, the better and more your tenants are going to feel comfortable communicating with you. And it's going to ensure that they want to stay within your home. I have several properties where tenants just wanted to stay on just because I was the particular person managing that property. Now, some of these properties were not my own, but I can tell you this, the way you treat people, just like you want to be treated respectfully, everyone deserves respect, no matter what they've done to your property, no matter what they've done to you. If you talk to people in a very respectable manner, you will always be able to issue a level of respect back to yourself. This has served me very well in managing my own properties and other properties that I've had under management. And I can tell you it goes very far. So if you have any questions, man, leave it down in the comments, because we want to hear what other things that you have a headache with, that you deal with from a landlord perspective. And hey, we'll do another video and share some tools and tips that can help you continue to manage your property by yourself. If not, hey, there's tons of property management companies out there, and there's a video that we'd love for you to check out to be able to know how to vet a property management company if managing your own property is giving you a headache. All right, guys. Well, as always, until next time, stay blessed.